What's up, Junkie Nation? We're getting close to the beginning of April, and all of April is going to be PFL month, man. They got a lot of cards, and it all starts on April 3rd. Locations, Orlando, Florida. We're going to see some welterweights, some featherweights. Let's talk about that with Dan Hardy, former UFC title challenger, now PFL broadcaster and matchmaker extraordinaire. How are you, Outlaw?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm getting ready to fly out to Florida and get these fights started. We've got, as you said, 4 shows back to back, and we've got some really good fights. It's going to be quite a pace.
You're not going to bother with going back and forth over the pond, right? You're just going to camp out in Disney World for a month?
Yeah, most of it. I'm probably going to return between the 3rd and 4th events, just because obviously we've got PFL Europe shows coming up as well. We've got Belfast and then Paris. So there's a lot of stuff going on over here, which I'm needed for as well. But I certainly will be there for the first 3 events back to back, because the travel back and forth would be a killer.
For sure. When you look at a card, as whether it's as a fan or just when they tell you what they're thinking, what do you gravitate to? And I'll give you what I'm aiming at. For example, when I was looking at this first one, right, I know I see Jason Jackson and Andrei Korshkov there at the top, but right away I just saw Jesus Pinedo. I really like the way he fights. It's been a while since we've seen him, but man, like I think I gravitate to who can scrap and why am I sitting here for 3 hours? You know, how about you? What do you look at as a card, as either you're building it or as a fan, and has that worked with you now being a matchmaker?
Well, I mean, you know, all these world tournament fights have been matched by the World Fighter Ops team, and you know, when I see these matches that they've put together, I mean, the thing that makes me most interested is when I see a fight where I could quite easily see both of the guys winning. You know, I could see two. Like, I mean, you know, for example, like co-main event, you know, you've got Taila Santos against Juliana Velasquez. Like, quite easily, I could picture both of those fighters winning in a couple of 3 different ways. You know. Like they're the intriguing fights for me. You know, you mentioned Jason Jackson, Andrei Koreshkov, another one quite similar. You've got 2 guys that have got strong wrestling. You've got real dynamic strikers as well. You know, there's a lot of unpredictability in their games because of their physical attributes, the way they're moving, and the skills in their arsenal. I agree with you about Pinedo as well. You know, we missed him last year. It was a real shame to see him, you know, have such a good 2023, and then we missed him for 2024. When in actuality, he was one of the main figureheads in my mind of the PFL when PFL and Bellator were coming together. So I kind of feel like we're still getting some of those fights happening this time around, and Pinedo's fight with Boric certainly seems like one of those kind of fights to me.
He is fighting Borix. And do you like the dynamic of PFL versus Bellator, or is that starting to wane now? Because we obviously had that first one, right, when champs were mixing it up. But what about now? You think that's worn off, or are you guys going to try and exploit that a little?
I mean, you know, I think it's a storyline based on the fact that we've got a bunch of Bellator champions, you know, all coming into the PFL World Tournament. So, you know, I do think that there are going to be some conversations. I mean, you know, you look at the Jason Jackson Koreshkov, there's 2 Bellator champions facing off against one another. Yeah. There are just certain fights where, you know, like I look at the Pinedo Boric fight, and I think to myself, you know, that's the kind of fight that you would get if you were taking, you know, the top level Bellator and the top level PFL guys to face off. But I mean, I don't really feel like that's the narrative this year around. I feel like it's much more about, you know, a real big competitive roster. I think it's just because Pinedo's been out for a year, he kind of missed those, you know, us against them kind of, you know, those kind of fights. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why they've matched him against a strong, recognizable Bellator veteran. It is to kind of, you know, give you that promotion versus promotion feel again with that fight.
Perhaps you're right. Maybe PFL and Bellator weren't really like there wasn't a heated or hatred or anything like that. It was always respectful. I was probably thinking too much about the UFC Pride days. You know, like we all wondered, well, who was better, and you know, finally they would fight. And then there was a little bit of the WEC. Remember the WEC? They had an overlap with lightweights because they had gotten rid of welterweight. there was the lightweights, Ken Varner and Henderson and Pettis and Cerrone compete, and everyone would diminish those guys, and they had a chip on their shoulder. And a couple of those cats came over and won world titles.
Yeah, the same thing happened with Pride, didn't it? We had some Pride fighters come over and win titles in the UFC as well. Like, it's the thing is, the UFC is such a strong brand, and they really do dominate the sport, that it's easy for fans to kind of look outside of the UFC and go, oh, these fighters aren't good enough, otherwise they would be in the UFC. And you and I, we all know that that's not the case. We've got the likes of Paul Hughes now signed up and had a fantastic bout against Usman Nurmagomedov. Like, both of those fighters, for my money, could compete in the UFC at a similar level. And I would say the same for many of the champions, both across PFL and Bellator. Johnny Eblen, for me, could really cause problems for any middleweight in the world. It doesn't matter what promotion they're in. And it's nice sometimes to be able to see those fighters, like Cale Harrison, who obviously dominated to a point in the PFL, then go over and have the same impact elsewhere. And I think that we could have a lot more of that success if there was more cross promotion. But of course, that's not why that's why we don't get the cross promotion fights. And it was a risk when they were doing it with Pride as well, because sometimes it didn't work out well for them. But the reality is, these fighters in this world tournament are world class, competitive with any, especially the lightweights, the welterweights. They are incredibly deep brackets that we've got in this bracket, and I think we're going to see those level of fights, come April.
I know that you do some matchmaking for Europe, or you might actually be the man, just a solo guy in that role. But you talked about a worldwide matchmaking team or something like that. Are you part of what's going on here with these 4 events too? Do you chime in on those?
No, with the world tournament. Obviously, we have a global fighter ops call once a week where we all touch base. But predominantly, these matches have been made by the fighter ops team globally, which would be Mike Kogan, Eduardo, and Greg Savage. They're the guys that have put these brackets, these tournaments together. My focus when it comes to matchmaking and signing is specifically for Europe. And it's just myself and a colleague, my friend James Steers. We do that together. What's nice about this is that I'm looking at this purely as a commentator, as an analyst. I'm not thinking about all the different personalities and stuff, because I'm not dealing with them as fighters. I'm dealing with them as it's a very different thing. I think when you've made the fights yourself and when you're just kind of there to witness them. I don't know. I'm not sure which one I enjoy the most, to be honest. But with these having such high level, matchups, it's nice to just be a fan and just kind of absorb the fights, more casually as an analyst, and then go and watch the fights as a commentator, because then I can kind of experience it more as a fan and just kind of be a an MMA fanboy, because there's a lot of good fighters in these 4 shows coming up.
Hey Dan, I'm just curious, how long did it take you to kind of get the feel for matchmaking? And can you maybe share what your first, I don't know if I want to call it mistake, but like first thing that kind of caught you off guard about matchmaking?
The first thing that I guess caught me off guard a little bit was that more fighters would think like me and like the old school guys that were around, 10 years ago. You know how it was back in the day, 10, 15 years ago. Like, you didn't know whether you were going to be able to get a fight, so you were chasing opportunities all the time and taking whatever opportunities would land in front of you often. It's very different now, with the emergence of Instagram and breakout stars like Conor McGregor and people like that. It seems to me like a lot more fighters are absorbing MMA as a sport through social media, as opposed to actually sitting down and watching the fights start to finish, which is kind of skewing their perspective on it a little bit. A lot of them are they're focused on getting the big highlight reel knockouts, which means that they don't always want to fight someone that's very good. And I end up debating with fighters that are turning down really good opportunities because they don't want to take a risk, and that's a very frustrating thing for me as a fighter. You know, even when I've had a fighter that's made weight, and you know, he's like his opponents miss weight, and we've brought in the alternate, and they're like, no, I don't want to fight the alternate. And it's odd to me because I was always a gamer. You know, I was always taking whatever fights were there, and you know, being a matchmaker now, sometimes it can be quite frustrating to deal with people that have got a, you know, maybe a skewed perspective of themselves, and you know, you know what I mean. You know, fighters can be quite difficult to work with at times, and it just seems like 20 years ago everyone was champing at the bit to get in there and fight whoever was put in front of him, whereas now people are way more cautious. And it makes it more difficult to make the interesting matchups sometimes.
That is so true about how people are consuming MMA now through social media. That's a very good point. I did want to ask you about this year. Who do you feel like? I mean, George and I, we're excited to see elbows now. Who do you think will benefit the most from that?
Man, it's got to be the strong grapplers. You know, I look at someone like Logan Storley or someone like Brent Primus, people that can just dominate from top position and you know can really do a lot of damage with a few short elbows. I mean, you know, the other thing as well is that we've got a lot of strong, you know, wrestlers of different styles in there as well. We're going to have wrestlers that are trying to chase to the back. We're going to have wrestlers that are going to try and dominate from top position. And we've also got, you know, the likes of Kana Watanabe, who's got a strong judo background. And what we tend to see in a lot of fights, you know, around the globe where you've got strong judo competitors, especially in the women's weight classes, for some reason, they seem to be able to dominate from a crucifix position, where elbows are so much more valuable to a fighter in top position than a punch would be. You know, you can do damage with punches from a crucifix, but you can really do a number on somebody with an elbow. So I think there's a variety of different people that are going to benefit. I'm most interested in seeing who's going to really, you know, step out with their elbows in the striking ranges. It's a little unfortunate for Dakota that she's not in the mix here, because I would imagine that she'd be able to really demonstrate some nasty elbows. One person I will give a shout out there when we're talking about elbows is Nathan Kelly. He's in the featherweight bracket, and his first fight when he was on the Bellator card in Dublin, and he was able to use elbows. He completely dismantled this guy with one shot. Paul Vickers ate an elbow on the fence and just fell over like a 100-year-old tree being felled. So I'm excited for the addition of elbows across the whole tournament.
You know, it's funny you bring up Dakota because she's already scary. And in the final, when you add the elbows, she threw an elbow that didn't land. But had it landed, I remember thinking Taila Santos's head would have landed like in the 5th row. It was so nasty, and the technique was so beautiful. You're right, man. I couldn't imagine week after week seeing her throwing elbows like that. That would be pretty insane. I do want to ask you about your sleeper fight and this cluster of events that are coming up. Is there one fight that people you feel may be sleeping on?
Man, well, there's an opportunity that's just opened up for Thad Jean, and I really feel like, I mean, he's a special talent. You can feel it when he steps in the smart cage, and he was on the prelims. He was one of the alternates, and unfortunately, one of the welterweights didn't get their visa in time. So Thad has got the opportunity to step in. And you know, I mean, it's an incredibly tough fight for him to step in at. You know, an opponent that's got a tremendous amount more experience than him, 17-2, I think Berkamov is. But Thad Jean, there's a special energy about him, and I feel like he might be the one to watch for this season, especially given the fact that he's got this short notice opportunity to step up, and I feel like he has the ingredients to rise to the occasion.
Dan, who, you know, when there's champions, the other guys are contenders, challengers, whatever. But I feel what they also are hunters. And when you're hunting, you're getting better, you're focused. You know, when you're the champ, silk pajamas, silk sheets, right? And I wanted to ask you, I'm going to name a few fighters. Which ones do you think are most dangerous? For example, Pinedo won a title, but wasn't able to come back. And now everything's just kind of gone. It's been over a year. But he's obviously going to be like, hey, what about me? I was something. I was a champion. Movlid Kabulaev, same thing, a champ. His disappearance was not necessarily because he took an L anywhere or anything like that. He's been injured. Then you got a guy like Jason Jackson, held the belt, probably wants it back. Then you got a guy like Braga, for example, came close but didn't win, and I'm sure he's still in hunt mode. Which one of these predators is like the most dangerous?
It's a great question, and I could honestly dig into every single one of those. And it's one of the things that makes these fights interesting is figuring out not only the technical skills that they're most likely to use, but also what their motivation's like. I mean, you mentioned a whole bunch of fighters there. I'll throw out a couple more for you. Like Brent Primus must be coming towards the end of his career. Like to go out with a bang and put $500,000 in his pocket and have a new belt to add to the case makes him very, very dangerous indeed. But then on the other end of the spectrum, Thad Jean, who's got less experience than everybody else in the bracket, the world's his oyster. He could take out 3 people and all of a sudden be an undefeated superstar. I think fighters find motivation in lots and lots of different places. Like Pinedo, I would imagine he's incredibly frustrated that he missed last year, and he's been developing this whole time. Braga must surely be driven by the loss of his father, and wanting to finally get that belt around his waist. These are the motivating factors for fighters is I always find fascinating, and where they draw that inspiration from. Sometimes it can be really obvious for us, and other times it can't. Sometimes it's as simple as not having any food in the fridge. Other times it's because all of your teammates have got a nicer car than you. We motivate ourselves to win lots of different things, and I think that not only this world tournament being a good motivating factor, but everyone's got their own thing going on, and I think that those stories are going to be able to come out in this tournament as it develops in front of the fans.
Yeah, and I guess we can even throw Umalatov in that batch too. Came up short. That's probably got to be a motivator. Your life changes, right? A much bigger payday, $1 million, the belt, probably some relief, man. And then what Teddy Atlas said, just by becoming champion, you're 30% better because your confidence grows, life slows down, you see everything coming in slow motion. But I'm tying all this to Dennis Goldsloff. Wasn't that a great story to see him keep coming up close? Not that I was hoping he would lose those fights, but to just persevere, man. You could see how much it meant to him last year. I like seeing those stories, and there's a few built in here.
Yeah, I agree. It was good to see Goltsov finally get that championship. I mean, he'd been chasing it for so long, and you always, even from the very beginning of his PFL career, you felt that he had the skills and the experience to be able to win the championship. It was just a case of putting the punches in the right order. I mean, he's got such a good jab. And what was also nice about the winning of the championship is, he beat Popov, who's a Fedor student, undefeated in 19 fights, was it? He had an incredible win streak. Yeah. And Goltsov was able to finish him off his back with a triangle, which the first thing that I thought to myself is, man, Ngannou's just won by ground and pound. If Fajeda had the triangle that Goltsov had, would that be a different problem for Ngannou to solve? So I think, I think not only the fact that he won, but also the way that he won and who he beat would also, it definitely added a bit of sugar to the cake. It was a very special night for him.
Last question. Who would you say right now are the top 3 stars for PFL? Now that the merger's complete, then we're going to kind of see them all under one banner.
Man, well, I mean, you've got to say Francis Ngannou is probably the most widely recognized worldwide. Closely behind that, I would say Dakota. I think people are really excited about her potential and her future and where she's going to go, what she could potentially achieve. And then I'm going to throw out a couple more from the European region. Paul Hughes, big news. Yeah. Is called big news for a reason. Again, he's right at the beginning of his career, really. He's 15 fights into his career. He's just leveled up tremendously in 2 fights in a row. I was concerned about his fight against AJ McKee, and he blew him out of the water. And then to level up again to fight Usman, you know, I'm obviously going to expect big things from him as well as everybody else does. And then my own personal favorite right now is Lewis McGrillen. If you've not seen his fight against Dean Garnett, watch it. It is, I think, 13 knockdowns for as long as the fight lasts. It is an absolute banger. I mean, Sean O'Connell and I were on our feet, jumping up and down cage side. It was incredible. And there's something about Lewis McGrillen as well, the McGrizzler. He's a little bit of a wild man, bit of a barbarian. And I think that when people are introduced to the energy that he brings, they're going to want to get on board. He's got the death touch in his left hand.
I'll definitely be looking out for him. 13 knockdowns, man. That's a lot. That reminds me of Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard in their first fight in the first round. Anyhow,
yeah, it was an incredible fight. And Dean Garnett is, you know, a real veteran of the sport as well. You know, well known. And you know, McGrillen jumped in on short notice as the alternate, and I mean, took the belt home. He won 2 fights in a row and took the $100,000.
Man, this is great stuff. All right, I'm pumped up. It's going to be a big month in April here for the PFL. Things start off on the 3rd. Dan Hardy, a big part of all this with some matchmaking skills, broadcasting skills, one of the best in-ring announcers too, post-fight. Hopefully we get to see you in that role too. Thank you, Dan, for the time as always.
Always a pleasure to talk to you guys. Thank you for your time.